Negotiation segment at the Harvard Arab Weekend. My name is Anuda Lozi, and I'm a Master in Public Policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government.
And my name is Rami Nauman. I am completing my Master's in International Relations, and I'm the Director of Panels. Diplomacy in the Arab region has long experienced a dual effectiveness and legitimacy problem. While well-executed diplomacy is highly challenging, it could serve to diffuse growing military tensions. Investing in the best diplomatic bridge to build amongst chaos demands experience, insight, and personal trust between leaders. As a region, we can no longer allow our ideological differences to hinder us from negotiating across them.
This panel welcomes politicians and academics uniquely poised to speak on the potential that diplomacy has to ameliorate the Saudi-Iranian rivalry for reconstruction to soon become the region's next focus. Allow me to start by introducing our moderator of our panel, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, who will be introducing our keynote speakers. Ambassador Wendy Sherman, the lead negotiator of the Iran deal, is currently a non-resident senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center and a fellow at the Kennedy School's Institute of Politics. Ambassador Sherman was sworn in as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs on September 21st of 2011, a position she returned until October 2015. Prior to this position, Undersecretary Sherman served as Vice Chair of Albright Stonebridge Group, a global strategy firm and a member of the Investment Committee of Albright Capital Management, an affiliated investment advisory firm focused on emerging markets. In 2008, Ambassador Sherman was appointed by congressional leadership to serve on the Commission on the Prevention of the Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Wendy Sherman.
Thank you. Thank you, Anud. And thank you to the co-chairs, Aya and Kami of Harvard Arab Weekend, and to the Harvard Arab Alumni Association, who have really put together an incredibly spectacular conference. And thank you all for coming this morning. Let me briefly introduce our panelists. And then what we're going to do is try to engage in a bit of a discussion. I'm going to throw out some questions to our panelists, provocative, I hope, to get a discussion going for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. But then we want to leave at least 45 minutes for you all to ask questions and also give us your views, because this shouldn't be just a Q&A. This should be a discussion about the Saudi-Iranian relationship, or lack thereof, and about the role of diplomacy and whether, in fact, we are undervaluing diplomacy or overvaluing diplomacy in what is clearly a very challenging time. So we need everybody's point of view and everybody's ideas. As I'll mention, one of our colleagues here knows quite well what the failure of diplomacy has meant for his people, and we need to talk about that today. So, first of all, it is my great honor to introduce His Royal Highness Prince Turki. He is incredibly well known to all of us. For many years, a great colleague and a great friend and a leader really throughout the world. As I think all of you know, His Royal Highness was the head of Saudi intelligence for 23 years, so he might know a thing or two. He was ambassador to Great Britain and to the United States. He is one of the founders of the King Faisal Foundation and chair of the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies. So he is continuing to learn and help us learn about all things, and we're very, very grateful. In the past, His Royal Highness has advocated for the U.S. to have direct talks with Iran at a time when others advocated for military action. And so we're going to explore where His Royal Highness is today in this debate. Next to Prince Turki is Ahmad Al-Alim Al-Soswa. Ms. Al-Soswa is a Yemeni journalist and politician who served as director of UNDP's Regional Bureau for Arab States. She was the first woman undersecretary at Yemen's Ministry of Information and the first woman Minister of Human Rights. And I should say, Madam Minister, that when I was confirmed to be the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, I was the first woman who ever held that position, which is sort of outrageous in the United States, but in fact the case. And I would also say that she is an activist, an outspoken champion for women and girls, which we should all be and must be. So thank you for that. Next to her is Hadi Al-Bara, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing painfully, because it is for painful reasons, not because he is painful. He's quite a leader. Hadi is the former president of the National Coalition for Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces. Mr. Al-Bara is a very successful communications executive who has committed himself to change in Syria and has used his communications expertise to work regional and international media. Hadi and I got to know each other when he was president, and as undersecretary, I was trying to work Geneva II. He was the lead negotiator for the Syrian opposition, and it was and remains an excruciatingly difficult time for the Syrian people. So very good to have you here. Thank you very much. And then finally, Karim Sajapur. Karim is well known to all of us as a policy analyst at the Carnegie Endowment. After working as the chief Iran analyst at the International Crisis Group, he contributes regularly to virtually every media outlet in the media space, print and social media and television, probably on your Apple Watch as well. The world has changed dramatically in how we communicate. So we are very glad to have Karim with us today. He's written extensively about the Iran negotiation, about Iran-Saudi relationships, and we're very glad to have Karim on the panel as well. So thank you, Karim. So we are here to talk about the Saudi-Iranian relationship. But I think fundamental to that, we're really here to talk about the region, which is in a very, very, very difficult place today. Now, up until this week, I thought this would be, a pretty straightforward relationship. When 10 days ago, 20 ministers sat around a table and tried to see if there was a peaceful way to resolve Syria in a way that the Syrian people would no longer have to face chemical weapons or barrel bombs, that the world community would work together to get rid of ISIL, that the 12 million refugees, and I don't consider the Syrians who are traveling to Europe migrants, I consider them refugees, the 12 million refugees could have a peaceful existence and could return home if they so wished. I thought that's what we would be talking about, but just to be a little provocative here, in spite of the fireworks at that meeting in Vienna and some harsh words between Iran and Saudi Arabia, not all that misunderstandable, we're in a different place perhaps this week. Last week, a Russian airplane filled with hundreds of largely Russian tourists exploded in mid-air in Sharm el-Sheikh's airport region, and it is now we are on our way to establishing whether in fact ISIL got a bomb on board that plane and exploded that plane. The British were the first to say they had intelligence that said that ISIL had it brought down the plane. The American president said it was a possibility. The Russians, the Egyptians, the French were quiet until Russian intelligence went to President Putin and said, well, actually, it is a possibility, and so we should suspend flights into Sharm el-Sheikh. If indeed this turns out to be the case, many analysts say this is a game changer. Everyone will have to think about what this means, how ISIL is fought in Syria and elsewhere, whether this changes how we are trying to achieve peace in Syria and allow the Syrian people to determine their future. So my question, starting of course with His Royal Highness, is this a game changer? Have you thought about this situation, this chaos in the Middle East, this threat by ISIL in a different way since this explosion? Or do you think that things remain the same? And if they do, what's that mean?
Thank you, Ms. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of this session for inviting me. Kami and Aya and Al-Anud and Rami, thank you for organizing it, and I hope that my presence here will be contributive to a discussion that will shed light and bring knowledge to the listeners. I'll start by the title of the session before answering Ms. Sherman's question. It says Diplomacy and Negotiation. When I became a diplomat after spending many years in the intelligence service, my late brother Saud, who was then foreign minister, defined for me what a diplomat is. And he said a diplomat is he who will say yes when he means maybe, and maybe when he means no. But if he says no, he is no diplomat. And from that context, I think this has been the practice of Saudi Arabia in dealing with international relations. And on that subject of international relations, when Rami told me that he was studying international relations in the green room, as they call it, before coming out here, I told him, beware, international relations are always illegitimate. And you'd better wear protection when you intercourse with others. On the question of the explosion in the aircraft, for me, the game changer in the situation with so-called ISIL, and I prefer, as you know, to call them fahish, is really much earlier than the explosion on this aircraft. It is when the world turned its back on the Syrian people. That was the game changer. That's what allowed for fahish to come into existence, and that's what allowed for terrorism to become so devastatingly cruel and disregarding any human or normal constraints. So everything goes now, and that is where the kingdom has been trying to promote a solution for the Syrian situation from the beginning, allowing the government in Damascus to deal with its people in the way that it has dealt. And one of the first things that Bashar al-Assad did after the uprising of his people, which was peaceful at the beginning, and he chose to turn it into a military confrontation with his own people. That's when he let loose the spirits of terrorism in Syria. And so the recent explosion on the Russian plane is merely a continuation of the turning back of the world community to the Syrian people. And we're all culpable. We're all to blame for allowing the killing to go on. You and we sitting here enjoying the comfort of being in this wonderful location of Cambridge and Harvard College and etc., all of the beautiful scenery and the good food we're eating and the coffee we're drinking. At this moment, scores of Syrians are being killed in Syria. And nobody is doing anything to stop that. Everybody has the means to stop it. but they refuse to deploy those means, if it is military, if it is diplomatic, or if it is economic or social. We meet in Vienna, we met before in Geneva, we met in Cairo, we met in Istanbul, wherever they may be. And all that comes out of it is words, but no concrete action. On the contrary, we seem to add to the pain and the suffering of the Syrian people simply by neglecting doing the right thing. And the right thing is to fix Damascus. That has to be fixed. And if you fix Damascus, Fahish will be fixed. Because then you can meet the challenge on the ground and collect a worldwide opinion. I don't care who does that. The Iranians, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Americans, the Europeans, the Russians, they all have to come together and do something about fixing Damascus first, and Fahish will disappear. I was with the Russian ambassador in Riyadh before I came to the States 3 weeks ago, and he told me, you know, this was after the Russian intervention in Syria, military intervention. Although they've been complicit with Bashar al-Assad since the beginning by providing him the ammunition and the arms and the advice that has allowed him to sustain his cruel treatment of his own people. The Russian ambassador told me that Russia wants to coordinate with Saudi Arabia in fighting the terrorists in Syria. And I told him, Mr. Ambassador, we've been doing that. And the biggest terrorist in Syria is Bashar al-Assad. So fix Damascus and you fix all of these things, hopefully with the confluence of the world community.
Thank you very much. And I also am very appreciative. I think we could sit and listen to you all day, Your Royal Highness, but I'm glad that everybody will sort of keep their remarks so that we can get this discussion going. Now, I'm going to wait on you, Madam Minister, for just a moment and ask Hadi al-Bara to comment on what His Royal Highness has said. Now, I think everybody in this audience, we can tell, is on the side of the Syrian people. And everybody in this audience wants the government in Damascus to change. Maybe there are one or two outliers here, but I think the applause speaks for itself, and it is understandable why, given the brutality that the Syrian people have had to endure. And I think Americans, you know, for at least a few moments anyway, have been horrified not only by the use of chemical weapons and barrel bombs, but by 3-year-olds drowning on the edge of a beach trying to find freedom, or children suffocating in a truck on their way to try to find freedom by traffickers who are making money off of human suffering. But you've been involved in the discussions, as His Royal Highness said, that have taken place pretty much everywhere. And so what's your take? And do you see a different approach that we should be taking that we haven't yet taken? And then I'm going to go to Madam Minister, who is she knows well in her own country of origin, Yemen, what chaos creates. And so I want to talk about that, and then ask Kareem to give his analysis of where we are. So, Hadi, please.
Yeah. I'm happy to be among you, among distinguished panelists and scholars and friends. I thank His Royal Highness for speaking on our behalf. He spoke more than as a Syrian than myself. I come from a region where time has a new definition. Time is not measured anymore in Syria by seconds or hours. Each hour, around 7 innocent people in Syria lose their life. More than 105 people flee the country seeking refuge outside Syria. More than 158 people, they've been internally displaced and had to run away from barrel bombs and atrocities of the regime. This is really the largest misery of this century, where we see none of our friends taking the right actions in order to stop it. They don't have the resolve, they didn't take the proper measures in order to put an end to it. 3 days ago, I was reading a little and researching, and I read part of a speech of President Obama in the UN General Assembly on September 24, 2013. He said that the United States is exceptional and its retirement from the world stage would create a vacuum of leadership that no other nation is ready to fill. Clearly, American leadership indeed is needed. Unfortunately, President Obama was wrong. There were many nations ready to fill this vacuum. And this is what created the whole problem in the Middle East. The US retirement from playing its own role as a leader for politics. If we look at the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, we have to go back into history, I will not go millennium back, but I think it all started since 6 presidents away. The Iranian, they started challenging the Middle East stabilization order of the United States, which was done after the 1973 Arab-Israeli war. Iran started challenging this order by taking the American hostages at that time. And from that time, we've seen the region divided between camp with the US, other camp with Iran, Iran trying to expand its relations with non-governmental organizations, with local militias, with sectarian players within the region, and nobody was taking this role as serious as it should be. From that time, Saudi Arabia was put on alarm, trying to find a ways to work out some type to manage these crises in the Middle East. But unsuccessfully due to the events which developed after that, after the Iranian Revolution, the hostage taking, and then the Iraq-Iranian war, and then the first Gulf War, second Gulf War. So the main cause, in my opinion, mainly is the lack of leadership of the US, the lack of resolve of the US, which Iran, Russia, ISIS, and various terrorist organizations have moved into this vacuum, and they are moving within the domain of this vacuum.
Thank you. So we're going to come back to that issue of American leadership. What's it mean to provide American leadership in the Middle East? And is it possible? And what would it mean? We're going to come back to that very critical issue. So, Madam Minister, you have lived your own country's nightmare about finding stability in Yemen. So both from that perspective and from the perspective of having been at UNDP and help people deal with human suffering, how do you see where we are today?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for really giving me this very important forum and to be sitting amongst such most distinguished people and lovable ones too.
Thank you.
I would like to start by saying that the struggle of my beloved country has been as such that I do not remember, not even a year, of my youth, of my also beginning of my old age, starting after the Golden Age, without really feeling that how difficult the question of building a state is. And that question, of course, has been posed not just from last decade or the decade before, and maybe we should also say that at least starting from 2008, the entire world started describing my country as a failing state. And that was like a crowning of the state, of the stages of the fragility of the state. So we were moving from a fragile state to a failing state. And also, importantly, I think, as well to mention here, is the fact that also the internal dynamics of the politicians, the political elites, and the role played by them all without any differentiation between those who have been, directed or, pulled towards right or left, because, Yemen has been always also, unfortunately, in the middle of the Arab region as part of the peripheral, kind of policies and proxies too, but for so many parts of the region. With that also, not to forget that also Yemen also inherited or did not have a very viable also kind of economic ability to really make sure that the people of Yemen are capable of building their lives, enjoying it, forgetting about poverty, being able to think about the future for their kids, etc. And with various degrees, of course, of enthusiasm, failure, and success, we all were so dancing with the stars on the night of the achievement of the unity of the country. But after that, and starting from the political stance again, by the political elite of my country, and especially on the eve of the Iraqi invasion to Kuwait, and the political decision made by the leadership of the country at that time, and what has happened after 1990, when it comes as well to the very isolating as well, with the deterioration, if you will, of the ability of the Yemeni people to live respectively, that led us, of course, to the Yemeni copy of the Arab Spring in 2011, and it was only through the GCC initiative, which tried as well to reach a peaceful conclusion between the different conflicting parties after the demonstrations in different parts of the Yemeni cities for former President Saleh to step down. And it was also along the sides as well of the result of that initiative. And unfortunately as well, one has to say, because also former President Saleh was guaranteed a form of immunity from whatever he has done in his last 33 years of rule, in order for him as well to stop mingling into the political or into the public life. But unfortunately, that did not happen, and it did not really, unfortunately, take place, which added to the complexity of the first transitional period. And unfortunately also, even while Yemen was always seen as the most peaceful version of the Arab Spring, there were a lot of waters going under the bridge, and it was not the least of them that we did not also have a capable government, a government that will be able really to answer to the questions of security and also to the economic viability of the Yemeni society, because the poverty is structural in my country. Moreover, the population growth is the highest in the world, not just in the region. And with that, of course, you understand the dynamics that create, again, with the lack of ability of the government to really lead or do anything. But now, of course, and starting from the day of 21st of September, 2014, that marks as well all the way the Ansarullah, known as Houthis in the international arena, made it in a quick march and in a surprising move all the way from Saada at the extreme north of Yemen, and they just landed in Sana'a, where all the public, if you will, offices, including armed forces, security forces, just gave up their authorities, and Ansarullah or Houthis became the de facto government, while the president was still there, while the government was still there in the apparent. But anyway, even after that, the developments of that particular move led to the intensification of the relations with the president and also with the prime minister, until Ansarullah decided to put both of them, both men, under home arrest. And we know the rest, and especially after President Hadi was capable of fleeing to Aden, and then when Ansarullah and former President Saleh and his troops started actually using even the Air Force, trying really to attack him and to get rid of him. After that, as we recall, President Hadi called upon Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries to come and help him really regain the state which has been really stolen. And probably that will lead us to another arena. And I'd rather just stop here, because then the chapter of war has created totally a different dynamic, totally different also reality, including as well this big vacuum of not having an authority that will be able really, for example, to do its best to satisfy as well the humanitarian needs, and also to prepare for the next stage, hopefully after there will be peace negotiations and talk about another transitional period.
Thank you. So I think we have some themes that are coming out of these comments so far. Obviously, the staggering tragedy that is taking place in Syria and how to stop it. How to address the horrific actions of the current government in Syria. We've had a discussion of American leadership, whether it's been absent, what it should be, how it should operate. What's the role of the GCC, which obviously played a very critical role in trying to find a path forward in Yemen and is part of the coalition to try to deal with Syria, but what should the role of the region be, whether it's Yemen or Syria? What kind of leadership should come forward? How do we deal with Daesh? No one answered my first question, which I understand, which is about, are things different after this week? Are they worse? Are they better? Are they just the same? Does it change the equation? Does it change the objectives of diplomacy or not? So I want to come back to all of those questions, but let's ask Kareem, who's our analyst here. The rest of us are active diplomats of one sort or another. Kareem, how do you analyze this all?
Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you. First, thank you so much for inviting me to the organizers. I'm not sure if I'm here because of my Persian heritage or despite my Persian heritage, but nonetheless, very happy to be here. And second, let me congratulate Wendy Sherman. I haven't had a chance to see her since the nuclear deal with Iran concluded. And when you talk to diplomats who represent the P5+1, they will all tell you that absent Wendy's role, this deal probably wouldn't have happened. She truly played an indispensable role. So those of you who aren't happy with the deal also know whom to blame. So let me try to kind of frame where we are, offer some broader context to the Iran-Saudi rivalry. I think Iran and Saudi Arabia, like Germany and France and Europe, or Brazil and Argentina in South America, are destined to be competitors. They're destined to be rivals. They aren't necessarily destined to be enemies and antagonists. I see kind of three parts to the rivalry. It's certainly ethnic. Persian Iran versus Arab Saudi Arabia. It's especially these days sectarian, Sunni Saudi Arabia versus Shia Iran. And it's also ideological, US aligned Saudi Arabia versus US opposed Iran. And when we look at the most bloody conflicts in today's region, whether that's Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Iraq, Lebanon, the Palestinian territories, they all have this element of the Iran-Saudi rivalry. I I think that at the moment, I'm not very hopeful that dialogue between the two countries is necessarily going to ameliorate any of these conflicts, because the reality is that I think it's the regional conflicts which exacerbate the mistrust and animosity between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And that mistrust and animosity in turn actually exacerbates the regional conflicts. It's not as if you just put Iranian and Saudi diplomats in a room and they agreed to cooperate, these regional conflicts would subside. But let me also talk about the rise of ISIS, and I guess it goes to your first question, Wendy, about where we are in the future of things. I really see Iran as kind of the arsonist and the fire brigade in the fight against ISIS. As Prince Turki and Hadi have talked about, it was Iran's support for the Assad regime and the Maliki government in Iran, which has really fueled Sunni anger, disenfranchisement, which has led to the rise of ISIS. But we also see Iran on the front lines fighting against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And I think, frankly, ISIS in some ways has served Iranian interests well, because it's allowed Iran to expand its influence in Iraq under the guise of fighting ISIS. And in comparison to ISIS, Bashar al-Assad unfortunately looks moderate in the eyes of many Western observers. So I don't think that Iran really has an incentive to see ISIS totally eliminated. The last point I'll make is that if you look over the course of the last 4 decades in the Middle East, if we were here having this conversation in the 1970s, the organization that was considered the most notorious terrorist group in the world at the time in the West was the PLO. And a decade later came Hezbollah, and it made the PLO look moderate. And a decade after that came Al-Qaeda, and it made Hezbollah look moderate. And a decade later comes ISIS, and it makes Al-Qaeda look moderate. And my concern when we look at these trend lines is that for me, the line which best captures today's Middle East is a poem from Yeats in 1910. He wrote this poem called The Second Coming. And there's a line from that poem in which he says, "The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity." And I fear in today's Middle East, as someone put it more recently, the extremists go all the way, and the moderates just go away. And my concern is that these trend lines are going to continue to grow worse in the region. We need to have, obviously, dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But absent what you're going to talk about next, I suppose, American leadership, I think that things are unlikely to ameliorate anytime soon.
So, Prince Turki, I think we would all agree that Saudi Arabia has long been the leader of the GCC, and long a leader in the region, and in the world for that matter. The US-Saudi relationship is critical, very important, very strong. So my question to you is really 2 parts. If Saudi Arabia and Iran sat in a room together, would that solve this problem? And 2, is American leadership absent from the Middle East, and would that solve the problem, depending upon how you define what American leadership in the Middle East is? Easy questions.
Very.
You're a practitioner of hard diplomacy, Ms. Sherman. Let me start by saying something that I firmly believe in on relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. 2 things will never change in those relationships. And Kareem, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself because you heard this before from me. One is geography. We're there and they're there, and we have to interchange with each other and interact with each other. You know, sometimes because of so many hotspots around the Arabian Peninsula, I wish that we could cut off our link to the Asian continent somehow and sail into the seas and perhaps lay anchor somewhere near Norway or Sweden. Yemen then will be peaceful, no outside interference. But unfortunately, we can't do that. So that's not changeable. The other thing that is unchangeable and will remain with us is that in both Iran and Saudi Arabia, we believe in the same God. We believe in the same prophet as his messenger. And we believe in the same holy book as our Sharia and our decider for life thereafter. So these things will never change. And it is unfortunate that politics interferes with these things. And I think this is where the crux of the situation is between Saudi Arabia and Iran is. And as Karim says, inevitably there is going to be rivalry on the issues that he mentioned, whether it is ethnic or sectarian or geopolitical. But I would have wished for those rivalries between us to take into account the things that bind us together, which are the beliefs that we have in the God, in the Prophet, and in the Holy Book, and also the fact that we're inevitably linked together by geography. But this is where diplomacy comes in. And to answer your question, Ms. Sherman, about sitting in a room together, I think inevitably in such a situation, and it happened before, our late foreign minister sat with Mr. Zarif in New York in September 2014 at the General Assembly meeting. And basically what they did is they reviewed each other's misgivings about each other. And the thing that was positive from that meeting was that they had agreed to meet again in order to discuss these misgivings and carry them forward. Unfortunately, other things intervened, the death of the late King Abdullah, and subsequently the death of our late foreign minister, his resignation from his post, etc. But now we've seen, as Ms. Sherman described it, the fireworks that took place in Vienna between the Saudi minister and the Iranian minister. But I'm not hopeless, as Karim is sounding. I think there is hope. And the hope is that the consequences of our actions will force us to come together. And I mean by that, Iran's so far unstoppable and unstopped interference in Arab affairs, from the Mediterranean to the Gulf, is costing Iran. It's costing Iran in money. It is costing Iran in human loss. They lose their officer corps in Syria, and I don't know how many other people have been lost in that conflict and in other conflicts in the area. That is one consequence, I think, which Iran should take into consideration as being better to improve relations with the Arab world than to interfere in the way that they have been interfering. And the kingdom has never shied from talking to Iran, from the days of Khomeini. And the reverse is true. Those of you who picked up this pamphlet that I brought with me will see how Khomeini and subsequently other Iranian officials have felt about the kingdom. And if I may, Ms. Sherman, I will just read one statement by Ayatollah Khomeini in which he says about Saudi Arabia, the veil, and this is 1979 and 1981-82. The veil was removed off their ugly actions. This time, the dirty hands of America, Israel, and hypocrites and traitors of the two holy mosques The leaders of the Saudi state targeted pure hearts of the pilgrims, and while they claimed that they are providing water for the pilgrim and maintaining the holy mosques, they water the roads and alleys of Mecca with the blood of Muslims. This was in reference to the demonstrations in the holy sites of Mecca during the pilgrimage, when Iranian pilgrims were heading towards the holy mosque to take it over. And there was a clash with the security forces, and there were several deaths of Iranians at that time. That's just one statement about Khomeini's own views of Saudi Arabia. Another statement that I would like to refer to more recently is the statement of the present Ayatollah, Khamenei. And he says, Saudis will receive a blow and loss in Yemen, and their noses will be rubbed in the dirt. This is official statements, and broadcasts on television and radio and so on. There has never been a reciprocal Saudi leader who made similar statements about Iranian leadership. On the contrary, I continue to say, and others continue to say, that we are fortunate that the Iranian leadership prides itself on its Arab descent. They all wear the black turban, which means that they are descendants of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So from that context, for them to take issue with us on an ethnic basis is really irrelevant. And we don't have that kind of outlook on them that they have on us. So I think there is hope in the fact that the consequences will inevitably bring us together. And we see it today, as Ms. Sherman said and others say, they describe Iran as the Shia state, and they describe Saudi Arabia as the Sunni state. In both countries, the societies have Sunnah and Shia. They have, absolutely. Absolutely, and this is, I think, something that people forget, that along with our geographic links and our faith in God and the Prophet and the book, is that our peoples are mixed sectarian-wise. And hopefully that will have an impact on the politicians.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Madam Minister, in Yemen, where there is also the presence of many different interests and Iranian support for the Houthis, at least at some level, and leadership by Saudi Arabia to try to help Yemen and the GCC to try to help Yemen. Where do you think the United States should be in this? And where do you see the diplomacy that might help Yemen find its way forward? And I'm going to ask everybody actually to stay as brief as His Royal Highness just did, because I want to make sure we'll go a little over 1 o'clock. The organizers urged me to do that since we started late, but I want to leave plenty of time for a discussion with all of you. So thank you.
I think I should start by saying that immediately after the announcement of the success, almost before even it was taken to the Congress, and all the speculation about whether the Congress was going to endorse it or not, already in the region, of course, all these news come not as a surprise, but people started feeling that when the time got closer to the endorsement of it, that yes, the United States wanted this agreement as much as it wanted just that agreement. I mean, like to stop really the development of any nuclear weapon, and perhaps also through the inspection regimes. But unfortunately, what is lacking, or what hasn't really been brought to, calm the regional actors there, is that the necessity of creating and perhaps maybe bringing a mechanism that will definitely be able to sort out all the issues which will rise from the fact that Iran is not anymore going to be fearing anything in any matter when it comes really to its expansion in the region, to its mingling, and mingling inside, inside the internal issues, etc. So the feeling that also the United States perhaps felt people felt that it is disengaging in a way, and all what it mattered to it was just to reach that agreement. That by itself, of course, led to so many reactions. And of course, on the side, but maybe then His Royal Highness will speak on that, but just to say that, of course, the Gulf countries, the Gulf states, really also thought they wanted as well to make sure that they are now capable as well of, protecting their own territories, their own interests, which are all legally, of course, acquired by them, and it's really part of their legitimacy there. And of course, if that situation continues, definitely, of course, and especially if Iran also doesn't show that it will really now move to the middle ground and will act differently. And again, there are issues of such contagious, feeling, including Iraq, Syria, partially as well Yemen, still even with all the influence that we are speaking about to Iran. And I think also for Yemen in particular in that case, because it is so immediate, it's really the back of the kingdom in that side, and also the rest of the other Arab Gulf countries. And it is very important really to stabilize the situation in Yemen before it gets out of hand, and before Fahish and its other sisters like AQIP and other also militant groups, which are now seemingly to, find interactions, and perhaps also they are taking over certain territories. For example, Hadramaut, it's not secret. Unfortunately, AQIP is in charge. In Aden, liberated on the 17th of July. Until today, the situation is not yet clear, but clearly as well, AQIP has a longer hand now in managing some of its affairs. And with that, of course, if the conflict continues, and if there is no immediate, really, ceasefire, if there is no immediate to answering the questions of how to bring things to a closure, I think then we will really find a very, very difficult situation, and part as well of, I am not sure what Iran is going to do more than what it has done, but definitely the situation in Yemen is so critical, and also again vis-a-vis as well the situation in Saudi Arabia, because any party that is launching towards to be legitimate definitely will need to be part of whatever is happening on the other side of the border in Saudi Arabia. Plus all radical groups, while they are announcing or working really to capture parts of Yemen, their final destination is actually beyond. They are looking at Saudi Arabia. And from that particular point, it is very, very important to find an immediate and closer, really, a closer as well for this issue before the situation really gets out of hand.
So I'm going to let Hadi have the last word before we get to the audience. So let me ask Karim to quickly comment on what's the leadership that's needed here? And to say American leadership, what's that mean? Or Saudi leadership, what's that mean? Or to be provocative here, Iranian leadership to respond to what His Royal Highness just put on the table about the commonalities of purpose. So how do you see the situation? Then I'll let Hadi al-Bara have the last word as the Syrian here about what leadership is needed by whom to do what, and then we're going to toss it out to all of you.
So there's a wonderful essay by George Orwell in which he is just described, it's entitled On Nationalism, and he differentiates between the concept of nationalism and patriotism. And he describes patriotism as is pride in your country for what it does, and nationalism as pride in your country no matter what it does. And I think in today's Middle East you have this paradox in which you have nation states unraveling. What does it mean increasingly these days to be Syrian or Iraqi or Yemeni, people putting tribal or ethnic sectarian interest before national identity. And then you have, at the same time, a hyper-nationalism in countries like Iran, in Turkey, in Egypt, and in some cases in Saudi Arabia, where you have a Sunni hyper-nationalism. And this beautiful theater, I'm sure, is a place where you have Shakespearean plays. And those of you who've studied the Middle East for a long time know the Middle East is not a Shakespearean morality play between good and evil. So I was very critical of Iran and Iran's role in the region, and I think that unless and until you have an Iran which starts to put its national interests before revolutionary ideology, a lot of these major problems in today's region aren't going to be resolved. But Iran is part of the problem, and I think that others in the room would acknowledge that there's a lot of blame to go around in today's Middle East, whether that's extremist sectarian ideology, or frankly the role that the United States has played in the last decade and a half in places like Iraq. And to go to your question, Rennie, specifically about American leadership, I do think the United States is in an incredibly difficult position, and that if you look at the Iraq War and its aftermath, that was an American sin of commission. And when you look at Syria now, many would describe it as a sin of omission. But no matter what the United States does, it's going to be blamed for the region's difficulties. But I think that one thing we have seen over the last several years is that when America kind of pulls back and disengages and tries to perhaps pivot to Asia, because it's a lot more comforting as a diplomat to work on Asia than perhaps the Middle East. These power vacuums are not filled by the types of people whom we would want to lead today's Middle East. I don't have, there's no silver bullet solution. I agree with Prince Turki that we shouldn't be totally pessimistic, but my concern is that, like the Lebanese civil war, we're going to have to go through, unfortunately, perhaps months, if not more years of exhaustion before the various warring parties are going to be ready to compromise.
Thank you. So before we turn to all of you for your comments, and I assume there'll be some microphones that'll be available to come around, let's ask Hadi Al-Bara to maybe spend a moment or two, not too long, on what you meant by the absence of American leadership, and if you were to write the prescription today of what you need from Saudi Arabia, what you need from the GCC, what you need from Iran, haven't mentioned what you need from Russia, to what you need from the United States to solve Syria, what is it?
Okay, first let me just, I need to comment first on your ISIS point. I think the change which happened, that it came earlier than the Russians expected, that they cannot leave themselves outside of the conflict, and they would burn their fingers within the terrorism and terrorist expansion in the area. But ISIS cannot be really dealt with only by military terms. It has to be dealt with through various political, social, and economic issues. ISIS was born due to the failure of the West combating Al-Qaeda for 15 years. If they succeeded, we would not see ISIS. ISIS feeds on the Syrian misery currently, which needs to be addressed. ISIS is the shadow of Assad, and you cannot get away, take the shadow out without dealing with Assad. Second, the core issue in the region, Iran and duplicity of its roles. Iran has to decide by itself whether it wants to act really as legitimate state, which understand the political order system of the world, deals in diplomatic matters as it requests, but in the same time Iran plays the other role, which dealing with non-governmental organization, militias, and few even terrorist organizations. Iran has to decide it can play one role, but it cannot play both roles at the same time. We see currently there is a struggle within the Iranian society due to the nuclear agreement. We see President Rouhani pushing to really get Iran out of the current situation, while the hardliners are pushing Iran back and arresting journalists and the freedom seekers inside Iran. The role of the US, really, it's a problem about the US strategy. The US has to declare and let it be known what strategy does it have for the new world. Nobody knows. So either you have to tell the world that this is your strategy, or admit that you have a mistake, that you have no strategy, okay? Or put your strategy on the table so everybody knows their limit and direction. Lastly, I think the main reason we have also these conflicts in that we don't have a common vision for the region. We don't have a plan where we want to be 10, 20 years from now. Where's the Arab plan? Where's the Iranian plan? If we could define really a clear vision for all countries, for the region, we can really move forward and start from that point in time. There will be no successful dialogue possible unless the US fully involved and maybe the P5 completely involved to start addressing the core issues in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the panelists put out one or two interesting ideas, to say the least. A lot of discussion here. So who's got the microphones? You do. Okay, so I can sort of see you, like everybody's going, pick him, pick him, pick him. Okay, so he's gotten the best organized group of people to point at him, so we'll let him start. Please tell us your name and any affiliation you have with anything.
Sure. My name is...
And then ask your question. And I would just ask people, I know we want to hear your views as well, but I hope everyone will be as disciplined as the panel is to keep their comments rather brief. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Almar Shakar. I'm with the Center for Constitutional Rights. My question is... Sergey, thank you for your thoughtful remarks. I wanted to ask you, though, about these pamphlets that were handed around and that you referenced in your statements. Specifically, a lot of,
hold the mic up to you because it keeps going in and out.
Yeah.
It's on. It just, if you take it away,
sure.
There you go.
So the pamphlet contains a lot of sensationalist, sort of out-of-context quotes that we would expect maybe from the Israeli Hasbara apparatus, but not the King Faisal Center. And it also contains a lot of reductionist statistics about sect and ethnicity that seem geared towards division. So I wanted to ask. My question is just, what was the intent of relations? Thank you.
Can I answer?
Please.
I assure you, I've been called much worse things than a collaborator with the Israelis. But the pamphlet is a collection. It's for you to review the veracity or lack thereof. And it's an effort to make clear that this is where we're starting from. This is going back to the origins of the Islamic revolutions, the attitude towards Saudi Arabia and towards the world. It's not an issue of blaming or condemning or anything like that. Simply facts put on the ground. And if the statistics are wrong, please correct them and we will publish them. But these are basically statistics. Most of them are from published sources. They're not Saudi sources, and there have not been any attempt to skew these statistics. Look them up, as we did, and simply put them out on the table. And if you can correct any of these statements, I would be happy to redistribute them and send them to you either by email or by any other means. But this is where we deal with the situation in Iran. And as I told you, I'm not one who is pessimistic about our relationship with Iran. There are things we can build on. And as I explained to you what those things are. And so any of you who have any issue with this publication, please correct it and send it to the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. It's on the internet. You can look up the website, and we will get back to you on it.
So let's go with one of the women up here in the, is that like a pink sweater? You will find that as a matter of personal privilege, it's always the first 10 hands that go up are you guys. And I'm intent on making sure that the women who also have a voice are heard as well. Tell us who you are and any affiliation you have, please.
Okay. My name is Natasha.
It takes two women.
Yes.
Don't think so, but okay.
My name is Natasha. I'm from Palestine. Our question was kind of the same, actually. That's why we're kind of gonna ask it just once. I work in refugee resettlement in Western Massachusetts, and we've been resettling like hundreds of Syrian families in the past like 2 months. And the first thing that a Syrian family asked me when they came, and you know, I was asking them, "Are you guys happy?" They asked me, you know, yes, we are. We're settled here, but at the same time, they said, "Wain al-Arab," which means where are the Arabs? And that, you know, and that kind of struck me because as hearing about the Syrian crisis and how His Highness was talking about, you know, we're all to blame. This is something that we can blame on everyone. I just wanted to ask, what do you think Saudi's role in, you know, resettling refugees when these refugees are asking us, you know, when these refugees are asking me, "Wain al-Arab?" You know, where are the Arabs? What is Saudi's role? What has Saudi done for these Syrian refugees that are suffering?
So I want to let His Royal Highness answer, but I also want to ask Madam Minister, who has worked with UNDP and with humanitarian needs around the world, to comment as well.
We are here. Many of you have not probably read the statement that came out of the Saudi Foreign Ministry that since 2011, 2.5 million Syrians have come to Saudi Arabia. We don't treat them as refugees. We treat them as fellow Arabs who have been through a misfortune, and when they come to Saudi Arabia, they're given either residency permits or temporary visas because they want to go somewhere else. The kingdom also supports all of the efforts of the United Nations and the other organizations that are helping the refugees in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey, and wherever they may be, including in Europe. So this is what Saudi Arabia is doing. I can't speak for other countries.
It is very sad as well to see that in the last 6 years, the number of the refugees from our region are actually the vast majority. They compose the vast majority of the refugees in the world. It's phenomenal. It hasn't happened not any other time. I mean, of course, if you want to start by the earliest, wave also of refugees, starting from 1948 with the Palestinian refugees to start with. And then after that, and then in the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, until the 90s, but the most violent situation of the region, which has become, unfortunately, very evident after the Arab Spring, unfortunately. Although I don't think it was meant for the spring, for the flowers to flourish, but it led, unfortunately, a bigger number as well of the original and the authentic population of our region really to be dispersed. And it is also sad, for example, to look at a country like mine, which is living under really very difficult circumstances also, but it has also managed to receive even refugees from Somalia, and refugees as well from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, from Iraq, from Syria, and even until today, even with the war going on, Yemen is still receiving a number which is not really as big as it used to be, but it is still receiving a number also of refugees from the surrounding, region. And it is a big question, because we know only refugees are really forced to leave their countries when their lives are threatened. And this is really the question. And then where is also the responsibility and the accountability of the national regimes? And look what happens really for the impunity of the regimes themselves when they become liability, when they push their own population, when they become scattered all over the place and no one can do anything to them. This is very, very important to really look at that. But of course, the refugee crisis is set to really record the historical record, and hopefully there will be a solution. I mean, for a country like Syria, as you know, I mean, it seems like now there is a bigger number of the population who are leaving their countries, and God only knows whether they will be able really to come back or not, and how are they going to come back. This is very, very difficult, and of course, to taking care of them, that also poses another challenge for countries like Lebanon, like Turkey, like Jordan, like the neighborhood as well in general. You know what pressure, what type of pressure really this whole phenomenon really composes to them. And also which leads also in so many instances to even some changes, sometimes undesirable changes as well, that happens on the recipient countries. So it's quite a sad and difficult situation, but it is to me very well connected to the rule of law, to the right of the Arab population really to live with dignity and to have the right to stay on their own lands. I think this is very, very basic, and it tells us, look how different we came from the beginning of the 20th century until today.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure, of course.
In discussions about refugees, particularly the Syrian refugees, with Europeans who are complaining about, the thousands of Syrian refugees that go there. A friend of mine was sitting with Europeans and they were complaining, and he turned to them and he said, take one refugee and all these refugees will not be there. And they said, who? They said, take Bashar al-Assad.
Okay, down here in the front. Can we get a microphone to her? Yes, I see all the waving hands. We'll get around. So what I want to do is I'm going to take your question and then maybe 2 or 3 others, and we'll take notes up here and then let people respond. So more of you get to ask questions. So go ahead.
So my question is, we've seen
Tell us who you are.
My name is Laura Al-Khoudi, and I'm part of Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights at McGill. My question is, we've seen many military interventions in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, and Saudi Arabia is leading a military intervention in Yemen right now, but we haven't seen until now anything actually happen in Iraq or any social or economic development happening after the military intervention, especially since Saudi Arabia has bombed a hospital after the coordinates have been given to Saudi Arabia in Yemen. So what do you have as plans for Yemen in the future in terms of social development after the military intervention, which has caused a lot of killings until now?
Okay, let's take some more comments, and then the gentleman, yes, right there.
Dr. Muhammad Hajiri, I'm visiting from Cleveland. I'm an assistant professor at Case Western, a cardiologist. So the first question is for Mr. Bahra. We heard you blaming the lack of leadership of the United States, but how much of the poor leadership in the council, the Syrian council, contributed to the demise of the Syrians right now?
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a few more and then we'll let the panel respond. You all are so funny. Anyway, gentleman here in a hat.
Al-Khadar Suleiman. I'm from Yafa American Community Center.
Bring the microphone closer.
Yafa American Community Center. My question is for His Royal Highness and Ahmed. It's regarding the events that are happening in Yemen, especially the biggest thing that everybody's talking about, which is South Yemen's cause, and the fact that South Yemen has most of South Yemen has been liberated because there is acceptance for Saudi intervention, there's acceptance for the coalition, whereas in North Yemen there is no acceptance for that, but there is acceptance for Iran or Salih's military militias. And so my question is, does Saudi and the coalition recognize what South Yemen, what the differences are and what the steps they will take to solve their issue? Because South Yemen was a former state. What steps are they taking to solve that? Because...
We got it.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's take the woman in white right here. I'll try to get to some of you that are back up there.
Hi, my name is Jumana Qassar. I'm a student at DePaul University in Chicago. I just wanted to ask, I know His Royal Highness said we're all complicit in allowing the Syrian crisis to continue. What can we as students, as people who aren't in positions of power, what can we do to help this cause?
Okay. It's really hard to see. There is a gentleman back here with a short sleeve shirt on it. Well, no. White, you. Yes, you. Stand up. Thank you. You can get a mic. No, the gentleman who's standing up is the one I meant. If you can get a microphone to him.
That's you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ibrahim. My name is Ibrahim Bukhamsin. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm a grad student in engineering. And my question is like, for all the guests here, like, you said like Bashar before ISIS, and Russia said ISIS before Bashar. And that makes sense, ISIS before Bashar. I don't know why His Highness claimed like Bashar before ISIS. Like ISIS are not a bunch of kids, like they are like a cancer in the middle of the Middle East, and it grows so fast. And I think the Russian claim makes sense and logic more than my country claim. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take two more comments, questions, and then the panel's going to get a chance to answer whichever one of these they choose to, or whatever group, because we're going to run out of time in about 10 minutes. So let's take her back there. Yes, you. If you can get a microphone to her, and then if you can get a microphone to the gentleman right in the middle here, so he can be next. Okay, go ahead. We're getting a microphone to you up there. Do you have one? Coming to you. And if there's a second microphone, get one to this gentleman here.
The ladies.
Yes, I see. I'll let the women have the last word. Don't worry. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mika. I study political science and religion at Concordia University in Canada. Now, it is evident that everyone sympathizes with the Syrian situation and the refugee situation. And every time any terrorist action would happen in the Middle East, in that area, the superpowers would actually intervene hands-on with their fancy tools and their fancy weapons. But as you have mentioned, that the talk is easy and actions aren't, and that you've been engaging in a lot of talks to end the situation. But I mean, when terrorist actions arise in Yemen, people interfered right away. But in Syria, no one seems to do anything. Everyone's been only talking about it. My question to you, is it a form of diplomacy or is it the lack of such? Thank you.
Thank you. And then, sir.
My name is Khalid Khalifa. I'm a political science student. And first, I wanted to extend my deepest heartfelt condolences to Mr. Hadi and all of us for the loss of Syrian lives every day. And it aches our hearts to see our humanity constantly and systematically compromised, but it seems to be taken so lightly by many. My question is specifically on Syria, and as Your Royal Highness mentioned, that the solution to the turmoil in the region lies in Damascus. Given that classical diplomacy and coercive diplomacy have so far yielded no progress, does that mean that the remaining solution is military action through a collective security approach? And if so, what role can the United States play, bearing in mind that President Obama promised new boots on the ground, and given the change in U.S. foreign policy orchestrated by President Obama's speech at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. in May of 2011? Thank you.
Simple question. Okay, we're going to have one last question, and there was a woman back here who had her hand up. What happened to you? Well, we'll do this one right here. This will be the last question. Part of it is the lighting makes it very hard to see you all, so I apologize.
Okay, hello everyone. Catherine Juma, Assistant Professor of Political Science and Religion at the University of Rhode Island. I have two comments for the Saudi Prince and Mr. Beher, the Syrian President. So the first thing is, according to my knowledge of the United Nations, there are no refugees in Saudi Arabia. Most of them are in the surrounding areas. So if I have two comments on that. If Saudi Arabia is interested in the aspirations of the Syrian people, why they're not accepting refugees? Number two, if Saudi Arabia is interested in the aspiration of the Arab people, why did they go against the Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi when he was elected after elections? And number three, for the Syrian representative, you're talking about American leadership in the region. What we got from American leadership in the region is a destroyed Iraq and Afghanistan, okay? And ISIS, according to political studies and United Nations, ISIS, most of it are products of the American prisons in Iraq. That's where ISIS is coming from. So what I see here is that Saudi Arabia and Bashar al-Assad and USA are all different faces of the same coin. Nobody is interested in the aspirations of the Syrian people, except the Syrian people. Nobody cares about the Syrian people who are dying in millions and hundreds over the street. So I just want to be honest here that political governments are not interested in what the people want, except the people want. And we don't want any more leadership in the region. We want the people to come out and have their own leaders and, say their own role. Thank you.
Clearly, there is no lack of women's leadership in this room. So what I'm going to do is start with Kareem and come all the way up and let His Royal Highness have the last word. But let me just briefly go down the list of topics that have been raised by this audience, and you all will choose which you choose to answer. I think starting from the last is really a fundamental question. Is this about leadership by any government, be it American leadership, Saudi leadership, any UN leadership, or is this about how the people of the region themselves can make their voices heard and be effective. And how is that to happen? If there is intervention, military or otherwise, what is the aftermath? What happens? Is there development? Does anybody care after the change? Whatever that change is, for good or for ill. Speaking of leadership, is there a lack of leadership among the Syrian opposition, among the Syrian people, if indeed the last speaker who got so much applause that it should be up to the people themselves, what do the people themselves need to do? And how do they organize to do it? What can the people in this room do to help with this situation, students or professors or otherwise? Action has been taken in Yemen for military intervention, but not directly, or not until recently anyway, directly in Syria by any other country in the region, through proxies perhaps, but not directly. And should that be otherwise? Finally, 2 points. In Yemen, there seems to be a bifurcation between the south and the north. Is that a historical consequence that will play itself out into the future? And coming back to where I began this discussion, wherefore Daesh? Is it just the latest iteration of the long list of terrorist organizations that Karim mentioned? Or is this something that we have to deal with on its own terms in a different way? So of all those many things, and I hope I've faithfully represented, at least in essence, what was put on the table, we'll start with Karim and come up the table. And I just ask you all, even though there's a lot here, to be brief because we need to end in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
So there was no questions for me, and I think 10 questions for Prince Turki. So let me just offer one concluding observation, and it was in response to the question of what can we do. When you go to international discussions on the Middle East and Davos and other places, there's always talk about the need to create IT jobs in the region. Steve Jobs had Syrian origin. We need to create another Steve Jobs in the Middle East. When I look at today's Middle East, I think one of the most needed professions in today's region, and frankly in the decades to come, are going to be mental health professionals. I'm not... You know, when you visit Doha and Abu Dhabi and elsewhere, you see a lot of new wonderful institutions, whether that's NYU or the Louvre or the Cleveland Clinic, or the World Cup is going to be played in Doha. But I think that when you look at today's region, we've talked a lot about Syria today. Half of the population has been displaced. 300,000 casualties. We see a lot of the signs of the outward scarring, but I'm sure all of you have seen the images which children draw when they're asked to draw pictures about their lives. And that's in Syria, that's in Iraq, that's in Yemen, in Lebanon and elsewhere. So if I was a 22-year-old young Arabic speaker and I really wanted to help today's region, I would think about lending a hand to this effort of creating institutions which are creating mental health professionals, and to attempt to destigmatize this issue of mental health. This is totally natural in a region which has suffered so much trauma and conflict that people are going to be dealing with these traumas for decades to come. So that's my answer to what can we do.
Hadi.
Yeah. I thank you very much for your question and for your question. I would answer both of them together. Syrian people, we are normal people like anyone in the world. We have revolted, first seeking to return of our stolen rights, human rights, constitutional rights. We were not afraid to pay the price through our quest for democracy and freedom. Numbers talking. 300,000 documented victims fallen. but the real number is more than 500,000, the undocumented victims. We are not in the blame game. We will continue our quest, however, and how much it will cost until we regain our freedom and achieve democracy in Syria. But this is the reality. You can talk with compassion, but at the end you need tools in your hand to change. You are paying the most precious price which you have, the life of your children and your fellow citizens falling every day. But also, you need to push the world to carry and stand up for their own responsibility, for the human values, for the common interests and fears which we share with them. Yes, we will continue. We did before, now we are doing, in the future we will knock the US until they change their policy, until they see how much hurt the Syrians are and how much they have resolved to gain whatever they revolted for. We are not revolutionary Harvard graduates. We don't have experience in revolutions. This is maybe the first or second true revolution in the Syrian history. Syria didn't have political system with democracy, so Syrians, they don't have either political experience. So we are learning. We did many mistakes, but we learned from our mistakes. If you compare the leadership of the Syrian opposition, they did their best. They could have done it better, but within the resources which was given to them, it was overperformance. It's just for you to know that the Syrian opposition, since its inception until today, the total aid received is less than $100 million. What can you do with $100 million or less? It's very little. The type of assistance and the way it was given in a way to have complete split between political path and military path. They were not allowed to meet. There were complete division among them. So I assure you, when we talk about ISIS, that the complicity of the Assad regime in ISIS is very clear. It's enough for you to know that 6 prisoners in the same cell, in Sednaya cells, they were released during the revolution, and the 6 of them, each one, went out and established armed groups. 1 or 2 of them, they were involved with Al-Qaeda. This is the same network was sending terrorists to Iraq to operate during the American occupation in Iraq. Yes, the US did not perform well in Iraq. They shouldn't continue the strong strategy and policies, but also it's very hard for them to correct now. So what we seek that the US will look at things in the Middle East, that with the broader scope, you cannot go one-sided. The US played a big role in the rivals between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries, because these countries, they stood with the USA during their rivalry with Iran. But now it's time for the US to bridge this gap, and you are the only one capable of doing this right now.
Thank you. Ahmad.
Okay, that's very super, of course, conclusion to what I'm going to say. But it is very important as well to recall what the head of the ICRC said when he visited Aden after the big, well, actually in the middle of the war, before Aden was liberated. He said, what has been destroyed in Yemen, in Syria for 5 years, in Yemen, that has been done in 5 months. Just to give you a hint about the level of destruction and also the victims of this terrible war, because there is now seldomly any governorate in Yemen which is not impacted by this very terrible war. And also to remember that, of course, wars, what do? They do destroy. They do also maim, if at best, they do just maim. And it is really important to speak about really the development and the reconstruction. And not just because, that happened now after the war. The infrastructure by itself of Yemen was so weak even before the war. That makes really the conclusion and the result, the consequence of the war, make it really sound even more horrific because the infrastructure was so weak. And this infrastructure was built throughout 50 years. So you can imagine how many years will that take in order really to rebuild and to, consolidate. That's why it is vital after such terrible war, and it is important really to go about stopping it and talking really about national reconciliation. There is no war anyway. There is no war that can go on with no clearer objectives, and the objectives, if really the Houthis are going now, as they have announced that they will be ready to talk based on the resolution of the United Nations Security Council 2216, if they are ready to speak about it and to discuss with the legitimate government, it is very important really also to include them according to their own also size, because nobody thinks that there will be a peace or stability in Yemen if any particular political party excluded, let alone after really that particular war. And it has been, of course, announced also by the GCC officials, especially by the Secretary General of the GCC, just few days in Manama dialogue, that the GCC is committed to really going with Yemen step by step, and they will do, of course, what they have been always doing. And it is also my duty really as well to say here, working for 1 year as the head of the Executive Bureau for the support of the acceleration of aid and absorption. And we have here Hadi Al-Arabi, who established it. Really, it was really thanks to the generosity of the neighborhood, of the GCC countries in particular. And it's important really, it is important as well to carry on with this very important as well partnership. And I wanted to tell my dear son here from Yafa, my husband is from Yafa, by the way, and he's also former Socialist Party leader. And I wanted to say that it's very difficult really just to oversimplify the issues to the level where you can say the North likes, so and so, and the South likes that and that. I mean, of course, Yemen in general is facing a very critical stage of its current history. And they have really to deal with all the issues related to paving the way for a more stable, future for Yemen based on any solution. And that will have all to be done through peaceful means. And because I hope that Yemenis have learned throughout so many, violent conflict, that there is no other way but sitting down and talking and resulting to negotiations and talks on the most complicated issues, including the question of the unity of Yemen, or for that matter, the non-unity of Yemen.
Thank you.
It's very important.
Prince Turkey.
وشاهد شاهد من أهلها. On 2216, the United Nations Security Council resolution clearly states, and this was done by unanimity with the Russians abstaining, and under Chapter 7, that the Houthis should withdraw from all the cities that they occupied by military force, that they give up the arms that they stole from the armories of the Yemeni government, that they release the prisoners, and I must tell you, there are more prisoners probably now in Yemen than ever before under the Houthi command there, and that they should return to the national dialogue, which was instituted through the GCC proposal that had tried to bring peace and stability to the Yemen, and it was abrogated by the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh. As to the bombing of the hospital, I don't know what the reality is there, but if there is any culpability, definitely the investigations that will be taken will clearly show who is responsible for that, and if there is anyone from the Saudi side responsible, they will meet their just deserves. There is no hesitation in the kingdom in living up to its responsibilities, and we take those responsibilities very seriously. There is also going to be an accounting for the other side's actions against the civilian population in Yemen. And it's not just confined to hospitals. It's confined to killing people in the streets, to imprisoning them, and taking them as hostage and collecting money from their families. That's the level of the action of the Houthis. On Iraq, Saudi Arabia has been trying to be very helpful to the Iraqi government, the Abadi government. We kept our hands off from the previous government, and I'm sure Ms. Sherman will know about that. America tried to get us to deal with Maliki. We refused for many years because he turned out to be what he turned out to be. But with Abadi, we think there is a chance there. If he is capable of convincing his own people that they must be inclusive of all levels of society in Iraq, and especially the marginalized Sunnis in Iraq. So in Iraq, we're provided support for the displaced persons in Iraq as a result of the Fahish attack on Mosul and other cities in Iraq. And unfortunately, the coalition that is operating in Iraq the kingdom has not been part of it because the Iraqi government has not invited us to participate in that coalition. If there was an invitation from Abadi, we would have been one of the first to enter there. On what can the students do? Well, you're doing a wonderful job by acquiring your skills and know-how at this university and at other universities in this country and in other places as well. But you can join the Harvard alumni and other non-government organizations that are operating on the field, and I hear many of them, not just for Syria, but for Palestine, for Yemen, and for all the other needy situations in the Arab world. So go ahead, be active. Don't stay back and say it's somebody else's responsibility. You should take the lead there. ISIS and Bashar. ISIS is the worst of the worst, and that's why I call them fahish. But equally, when you think at how many people ISIS killed and how many people Bashar killed, you'll see that Bashar is even worse than fahish. So there is no disclaimer of any responsibility for fahish here. Fahish is a criminal organization that has not any inkling of humanity in it, and it must be dealt with from that aspect. And military action in Syria, well, the kingdom is part of the coalition that is operating in Syria. Our late foreign minister 2 years ago said publicly that Saudi Arabia would be willing to put boots on the ground in Syria if there was a concerted effort by the world community to do that. We don't have the capabilities to go it alone in Syria. And as we've shown in Yemen, we need a coalition to work with, and we're ready to work in Syria as we have been working in the Yemen. So there is no reluctance there on Saudi Arabia's part to be in the lead in engaging in military action in Syria. But as I said, there is a worldwide criminally negligent attitude towards Syria, and unfortunately, all so far we've done is simply talk about what is needed and not what should be done. And I think what should be done is an immediate ceasefire. And all the countries involved there can impose that ceasefire if they have the will to do so. On Mohammed Morsi, young lady, it was the Egyptian people who rejected Mohammed Morsi, not Saudi Arabia. When Mohammed Morsi was president, he came to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia extended support to the Egyptian government without any hesitation. So don't blame Saudi Arabia for what happened to Mohammed Morsi. Last word about the American role in the area. From 2007, when President Obama was campaigning in his election campaign, he clearly said that he wanted to fix the situation with Iran. He didn't hide his intention, and he worked diligently to do that. There was no lack of strategy there. There was a strategy. And throughout his term, when one of the first things he did was to greet Khamenei on the Nowruz festivities in Iran after Obama became president. Subsequent to that, in the June elections in Iran, when there was an uprising in Iran against the results of the elections, President Obama did not utter a single word of condemnation on the action that was taken by the government against its own people. So I was not surprised to see that President Obama had pivoted to Iran and everything else in the area. He was focused on this nuclear deal, and he got it. That may be creditable, that may be bad, but he had a strategy and he worked for it. And the rest of us should wake up and say, okay, that's it. Yani, this is where President Obama took his country, and he was successful in that. As far as we are concerned, we in Saudi Arabia have tried to talk to Mr. Obama to show what consequences will be by his leaving out all the other things that are equally important from our point of view, whether it is the issue of terrorism, whether it is the issue of Iranian interference in Arab affairs, and more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, what is going to happen to Palestine. Palestine is the root of all of these things that we are facing today, and anyone who claims or decides that that is not the case should read his history. Read what the Israelis themselves are saying about Palestine, those who want peace with the Arabs. They're blaming their own government for bringing danger to the Israeli people by the stand that they have taken against the Arab Peace Initiative, against negotiations with Mahmoud Abbas, and by Netanyahu's challenge to Mr. Obama throughout the 2 terms of the Obama administration. And today in the papers I read that Mr. Netanyahu is coming to mend fences with Mr. Obama. Well, if I was Mr. Obama, I would shut the doors of the White House against Mr. Netanyahu. So the leadership of America, I think, is necessary because it has the wherewithal. You are part of this wherewithal. These institutions that America has, that are a model for the rest of us in the world, they make what America is. Their military capabilities, no one else has those military capabilities. Their economic capabilities, no one else has those economic capabilities. For those who say that America should not be leading, and there are many Americans who are saying that, I think that is a big mistake, because everything comes home to roost. There are Americans today fighting with Fahish in the field in Syria. So these people are going to come back here and do harm to America. So there has to be a fixing of the situation in Syria in order for America to avoid meeting this challenge should it arise. Thank you, Ms. Chairman.
Thank you. Wait. Just one moment. I know we've run way over. I have not made comments, but rather acted as a moderator, but I do need to say one thing for the record. The United States of America negotiated with the P5+1, the European Union, and Iran for a nuclear deal because we believed, as horrific as things are in the Middle East, they would be all that much more so if Iran had a nuclear weapon, could project that power into the region, and could act as a deterrence in the region. That the horrific instability in the Middle East, which is in part caused by Iran, would be even that much worse. So the desire to do this negotiation had nothing to do with ignoring everything else, and in fact we have not ignored everything else, quite the opposite, some to the good, and as you have accurately pointed out, some not so to the good by American leadership over the years. So I want to assure everyone in this room that President Obama, Secretary Kerry, Secretary Carter, all the rest of the US government is firmly committed and working in coalition with everyone in the region to do what I think is fundamental to everyone in this room, and that is support the people of the Middle East in their own aspirations for the future that they choose for themselves. And I thank you all very much for your participation today.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Please remain seated, everyone. As a token of appreciation, we would like to thank our speakers with this humble gift from everyone, from all of us. Thank you, Ambassador Wendy Sherman.